morning. Today is Monday, the day everybody's been waiting for, June 14th. And it is the Fort Worth Fabric Studios Suddenly Summer Mystery Quilt. Now, if you have your kit, I have mine laid out so we can look at the colors. I've got it labeled. I'm going to show you what I've done. You should have received some papers by now. You either get an email or you go to the website, FortWorthFabricStudios.com, to get your paperwork. You should have 3 kinds of paperwork. So the first paperwork you should have is the fabric guide. Now this tells us all the different fabric that's in the kit if you've got the kit. If you don't have the kit and you want to follow along and you're going to use your own fabrics, I would get a piece of paper and I would take my fabrics and I would mark them just like this. Especially if they're similar, like you've got some pinks or some reds and they run it together in the colors. So that's the first piece of paper you'll have. The second paper you're going to have is the cutting diagram. And this is for the white. Excuse me, there we go. And you guys know that when I use this diagram, if I can cut out a little bit different so that I have bigger pieces left over, that's what I'm going to do. And then you're going to have this guide here. Oops, I've got my fan on, so that's why it keeps blowing. That is a page. And then here's the second page. You got 2 pages of that. Okay. Now you can do one of 2 things. You can either cut all your fabric out, which is what I'm going to do, or you can only cut it out, or you can cut it out week per week. So it's going to be up to you, whatever you want to do. So I'm going to give you some tips about cutting your fabric, and let's go ahead and get started. Let me show you what I've got here on the table first. This is the way that I have it laid out. So I just have it right in order. Nothing special about it. I always keep it in order so I can cut it, and I keep my sheets together so I can keep track of all this stuff. Now I don't have any of this ironed yet, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start ironing it before I get started with the cutting. I always iron it first. If you're one of those people that use starch, then you need to go ahead and get it all starched while you iron it so it's all prepped. So the very first thing that I'm doing is I've ironed my fabric the best I can. I'm going to take off the end because, as you can see, it's not even. We want to make it even. I always use a ruler that is larger than the width of my fabric so that it hangs off both ends, so I have a better chance of getting it straight. I always use a weight because I don't have the strength anymore to hold the ruler down. So I just use this weight right here. I'll put that on there. I'll go halfway, and then if I have to move it, I will, because I can put the pressure on the bottom of this ruler here. And I always keep one hand on the fabric and one on the ruler so that the ruler doesn't slip. And I can see, I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but I can see where my fabric is right off the edge there. And I line it up at the bottom with my ruler. So right here, I have it lined up along the lines, and then all I do, slowly go all the way down. I can move my weight if I need to. And see, it's cutting real nice. And then, because it's been a while and I haven't cleaned out my sewing machine, I'm going to clean out the sewing machine. I'm going to change my needle so that it's all ready and I won't have any issues while I'm sewing this. We're going to begin with our first cut. We take our cutting diagram. This is strictly the A fabric, which is the white or whatever color that you're using as your main fabric. And it is saying that we're going to cut 2.5 strips. And if you're looking at this paper, we're going to cut 10 of them. That's the first thing. The width of the fabric. This fabric is folded in half, so it's going to be twice this length that's on the table that you see. And that's the very first thing we're going to do. We're going to go right in order. And everybody pretty well knows how to cut a 2.5 inch strip of fabric, I hope. WOF means the width of the fabric. And then what I'll take is, I have a long ruler. It's good to have 2 long rulers versus a short one. So I take this one here, which is a 3.5 inch ruler. And I will come down to the 2.5, and I can do it either way. If I go this direction, it has 2.5 marked. But I always like to see my 1. I always like to read from the right to the left and do my 2.5. And here's 2.5 with a little white circle right there. So all I have to do is, while my ruler's still down, I'm not picking it up or anything. I don't want to disturb this fabric that I just cut. And I'm going to the black circle of 2.5. Well, let's go this way. Actually, you can double check yourself. So when I go this way and it says 2.5, it's the black. I don't know where the word green come from out of my mind. The black is 2.5 that direction. You can check yourself with this ruler now. This is a Creative Grid ruler, and this one can be double checked because if I flip this around and go that way, it actually says 2.5 in the black. So it's 2.5 in the black or 2.5 in the white. It doesn't make any difference. And I always put my fabric a little bit right on the line so I can see a little bit of my fabric on the other side. And you want to make sure it's totally even before you even start. And then just push this one off to the side and slowly cut it. Line it up at the bottom for your 2.5. So you're really doing two things at once. I've lined it up at the bottom of my fabric because I'm trying to get as even as I can. And then I line it up here at the top. And then if for some reason my fabric, let's say like right here in the middle, it's sticking out more towards the right, then what I do is I pick up my weight to get the weight off of the fabric and just slowly pat it to the left. And it slowly moves off of that. I'm just watching it while it's there. And it's sort of like it's straightening it out. Because I want to make sure the same thing is all the way down. I don't want to have to stop and move my ruler and shift it to the right or the left. And then I just take it. And there's my 2.5 inch strip. And then I will do 10 of them like that. And I'll just set them aside. Now the next cut on the paper says we need 2 cuts of 8 1/4 by 8 1/4, and then we need 3 6.5 by 6.5. So the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you get the largest square out first. So measure it 8 1/4. So I'm going to go to, this is my ruler here, and you want to make sure that your ruler is bigger because you don't want to line your ruler up against here because you might be off on your fabric. So I want to go 8 1/4. This shows me 8 1/2, but it doesn't show me 8 1/4. So based on this ruler, I cannot use it because of the way the markings are. So I have to put this one aside because I can't use it. This one, however, is an entire 8 1/2 inch ruler. So I can get my 8 1/4 because I have the markings on it. So I go to 1 through 8 1/4, and it's got white lines and it has little bitty short black lines. They're little dash lines. So I put it on there and I can go up, make sure it stays the same thing, come down and it stays the same thing, and I don't have to worry that I'm off. Put my weight down, move this, smooth it out. Now if you've had to lift this fabric, you want to make sure these two ends are even. You might have to cut a little bit off, and then we're going to cut it. That is going to give us our size that we need. We're going to check it out right now. Let me rearrange the fabric on the table. Now before we proceed, we want to cut the selvage off. The reason I want to cut from this end, if I were to cut from here, I would lose fabric. If I cut from the selvage and go that direction, then at the tail end, let's say I had a piece that stopped right here, I could at least unfold this. But if I had cut it there, I would only have this amount of fabric and I wouldn't be able to unfold it and create more fabric, or have more fabric, not create it. So you want to check your selvage, and it's the pieces with the little holes in it. Smooth out my fabric. I come down because I want to take all those off. I don't want any of those holes in my fabric. So I've cut the selvage off. First cut is the 8 1/4. Take this back here. Now, because this is 8 1/2, it's going to be off of each end, so I can still use this ruler. So go down to 8 1/4, line it up, and then just cut it off. And this said it wanted 2 of them 8 1/4. So there's one. Okay, so I've come back so that I can explain a little something here. This width of the fabric, this is where your fabric is laid totally out. That means no fold. Keep in mind, I have a fold. And because I have a fold, when I laid this strip out and I cut my 1 8 1/4, that gave me 2 pieces. All right, so I don't have to cut 2 out of my folded fabric to have 4. So I cut one piece out. Here, I need 3 of them. So I will cut out 1, which will give me 2 because my fabric is folded. So that'll take care of them. Then I will lay my fabric out and cut the next one. And I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. So I take my ruler and it says 6.5 right there. So I put it on 6.5. Now, of course, you know this is not going to be squared because this is, the reason it looks off is this is a 8¼ inch piece of fabric. It's not 6.5 inch. We're going to make it a 6.5 inch square. So first, I measure out my 6.5, cut it. It gives me 2 pieces. Make sure there we go. I'll rotate it. And if you have a rotating mat and you want to do it on your mat, that's fine. I'm going to line it up with my line right here on my mat. My ruler back down on the 6.5, and I'm going to cut it. Now, this gives me 2 6.5 inch squares, which is what I needed, and I need 1 more. If this, I don't want to be cutting all of this because this is where I can use this fabric for something else. So I open it up and I measure out 6.5 right here, before the fold, mind you. I cut it. I'm going to rotate it just like I did before. Measure out 6.5. Now I'm looking at these lines as well as this line here, trying to square it up using both. And there is my 6.5. So now I have 3 6.5 inch squares. This is left over, this is left over, and this is left over. So I can take these pieces that are left over and use them when it gets down to the bottom down here, okay? Instead of using up all of this, I can use these scraps. This is how I end up with bigger pieces of fabric left over. So I've got the 3 pieces here. Now I'm going to cut, and it's going to be easy to cut the 5.5 by 5.5 because all I got to do is cut it 2 times. I'll get 2 on my first cut and 2 on my second cut. So let me set that up. I'm just cutting 2. Now before I go on, I'm going to go ahead and explain to you that I'm marking these, and the way that I do it is I put the size of the square and I put the number of how many I have in a circle. Alrighty, so I have it set up for the 5.5 inch, and it says I need 4 of them, but I'm going to cut my entire strip 5.5. So you can see I've gone down to the 5.5. This is a 6.5 inch ruler, a Creative Grids. That's my favorite rulers. And I went ahead and I rolled my thing up and down so I can make sure that it was exactly 5.5. So let me go ahead and cut it. Everything's matching up. And there's that strip. And now I'm going to cut smaller pieces, which is where the word subcut comes in. Alrighty, so you want to make sure this is 5.5 inch cut right here. I've marked it on my fabric with my ruler, and yes, this is 5.5. And so we need 2 cuts because my fabric is folded. There's 1 and 2, and then I'll mark them. And then the next is asking for a 4.5 by 4.5, and they want 4 of them, so that's 2 cuts. So we should be able to get to 2 cuts. 4.5, keeping in mind again that this is not 4.5 this wide. That's why it looks like it's a little bit off. Don't let that throw you. There's 4.5, here's 4.5, and then we'll get them to be squared. There's my 4.5 inch square. Another tip is whatever rulers you start working with, that's what you want to continue to work with. Now let me show you to get this line squared up. I'm off a little bit here, but I do have the 4.5 down here at the corner. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and cut this, turn it, line it up 4.5 with the lines, both sides, because I know that this is straight here, and then it's going to take off a little bit right along here, which is fine. And then I'll mark these. And then the next step is going to be another set of 4.5 for the next strip. Now going forward, we're going to be cutting a 4.5 off of this strip to finish up our strips. So far I have 4 of them marked over here, but I went ahead and I circled 8 because we're going to need 8 total. So I've got 4 from the last cut. Now I'm going to get 4 out of this cut. Now the very next thing that the sheet says is we're going to need 2 by 2, so those are 2-inch squares, and they want us to cut 8. So you can either do it one of two ways. You can lay your fabric this way and cut 2-inch squares, which is what I'm going to do, or you can lay it lengthwise and cut out 8 of them and then cut them all down. But I think it'd be easier if I do it this way. So I'm measuring out my 2-inch, and then I am going to cut it. Whoops, it just moved on me. See, even with the weight, it'll move. Okay. And then I'll lay it like this, and I'll cut 8 of them out, just like that. And let's see, we're going to have 16 of them are going to be 2 by 3.5 inches. So we'll take this strip here, and we'll make it 2 inches. This way I utilize all of this fabric. All right, so let's do that, and then we'll come back. Now we're going to start on the green because it is the very first thing that it says. After all of this, with A, fabric B is next. It's the wide drip green with our colors, and we're going to cut 4 2 by 11 3/4 rectangles and 8 1.5 by 7-inch rectangles, and we're saving them all for week 3. So let's go ahead and do that. I want you to continue cutting all your fabrics out. Watch when you read this, because now we're done with our sheet. I call this the cheat sheet. We're done with that sheet. That's only the white. After the white and we start our colors, we go by what's written on this fabric, on this piece of paper right here. So everybody go ahead and cut theirs out. If I run into any kind of problem, I'll stop and I'll let you know. Now going forward, for my fabric C, since there is so much to do, I went ahead and I subcutted. Now subcut means you take 2.5-inch strips. They want you to take 4 of them. That's what this means in the parentheses. All I did was cut 4 2.5-inch strips. Then I cut 2 4.5-inch strips. Then I cut 2 5-inch strips. And now I will go ahead and cut out the fabric I need, since I have them all cut out. And I'm going to continue to do that for the rest of my fabrics. And when they're all done, I'm going to show you how I've got them all marked and sitting on my design wall. My design board, not my design wall. Now, as you can see, here is all of my cuts all laid out. So I wrote in them in blue. That's telling me what the size and how many. The other color is telling me the week. So week 1 is the cutting. Week 2 is in yellow. Week 3 is in pink. Week 4 is in green. 5 I have in orange here. There's 3 sets. And then 6 is the last one we put it together. And I just made that in white. But I accidentally cut the pink. Let me see what number it is. Hold on. So the color that I cut wrong was G, which is called the Moda Sunday Strawberry Pack Red. This is like a lot of pink in it with strawberries on it. And because I did that, I had to replace, it was only 5-inch squares, but I accidentally cut 5.5, so therefore I shortchanged myself one of the blocks. But I had these strawberries fabric, so I went ahead and cut for week 2. And it blends in quite a bit with all the other colors and everything, so it's not going to look off. It goes really good with this grunge, by the way. Look at this color right here. That goes really good. So I don't think it's going to be really bad that I had to change it out. But mistakes happen. I don't want to get more fabric. I just want to go with it. So I hope you all enjoyed the cutting. I didn't run into any problems. Looks like they're all accounted for. After I marked them all, I didn't have any kind of problems or anything with anything other than that one boo-boo I did on myself. So I will see you on Monday next week for week 2 of putting it together. I think you all will be really, really happy with it, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.